For 73 years, the world waited for one man to become king. Not because he had conquered a nation, not because he had won a war, but because destiny asked him to wait. Every sunrise brought him one day closer to the throne, and every sunset reminded him it still wasn't his. While the world changed around him, presidents came and went, empires disappeared, technology transformed humanity, yet one thing never changed: the man who stood second in line, waiting, watching, preparing for a moment that history seemed determined to delay. Every king has a beginning. Charles's began on a cold November morning in 1948. The celebrations echoed across Britain, but no one truly understood the weight this newborn would one day carry. He wasn't simply born into a family. He was born into history, into centuries of tradition, expectation, and sacrifice. His cradle stood inside palaces most people would never see, surrounded by priceless treasures, yet separated from the ordinary childhood every child deserves. Outside, Britain was rebuilding after war. Inside the palace, another future was quietly being built. His mother was Princess Elizabeth. His father was Prince Philip, disciplined, demanding, and deeply committed to duty. Neither could know the extraordinary path ahead, because 4 years later, everything would change. A king would die, a young mother would become queen, and a little boy would suddenly become heir to the British throne. Childhood ended before he was old enough to understand why. Every lesson became preparation. Every public appearance became training. Every photograph became part of history. The world saw privilege, but behind palace walls, destiny often felt like isolation. Long before he wore the crown, Charles had already begun carrying its weight. Most children wake to the sound of parents calling them to breakfast. Charles often woke to palace routines that had existed for generations. His world was one of polished marble, royal etiquette, and quiet discipline. Behind every smile stood centuries of tradition. Every room reminded him that he belonged to something far bigger than himself. Even as a boy, privacy was a rare luxury. Every appearance was watched, every gesture photographed. His childhood unfolded in front of the world. Yet, much of it was spent in remarkable solitude. Duty arrived long before adulthood. History became part of his daily education. Constitution, ceremony, tradition, lessons few children could imagine. Outside the palace, Britain embraced a new era. Inside, time moved differently. Royal customs remained largely unchanged. The institution expected continuity, not speed. Charles learned that being royal meant representing stability, not simply for one generation, but for many. His teachers challenged him intellectually. His parents expected discipline and resilience. The expectations were extraordinary. The opportunities were equally extraordinary. He grew up surrounded by history, yet also creating it. Every year brought him closer to responsibilities few could fully understand. Long before the crown rested on his head, its responsibilities had already shaped his life. History had chosen its future king, but history was in no hurry. In 1958, Charles became the Prince of Wales. The title carried centuries of symbolism and decades of expectation. His mother would continue one of the longest reigns in British history. Every year strengthened her legacy, and every year extended his wait. There was no timetable, no election, no campaigns, no promotion, only patience. Decade after decade, the world transformed around him. Governments changed, technology evolved, generations grew up, yet Charles remained the heir apparent. Many people knew no other Prince of Wales. Duty never paused simply because the crown had not arrived. He travelled tirelessly across Britain and the Commonwealth, meeting leaders, communities, charities, and ordinary citizens. He developed interests in architecture, sustainability, farming, and conservation. Some admired his willingness to speak openly. Others believed a future monarch should remain silent. Public opinion shifted with every decade. Through praise, criticism, triumph, and disappointment, one constant remained: the waiting. Every birthday carried the same unanswered question: when would his time finally come? No living heir had ever waited this long. History was quietly rewriting itself. The boy who once looked toward the throne had become an older man, still preparing for a responsibility that had never stopped approaching. Time had not stood still. It had shaped the king he would eventually become. For every crown, there is a private life hidden behind public ceremony. For Charles, that private life became one of the most discussed stories of the 20th century. In 1981, millions watched as Charles married Lady Diana Spencer. It was presented as a fairy tale, a prince, a young bride, and a royal wedding unlike any before it. Crowds filled the streets of London. Television audiences around the world watched history unfold. The ceremony reflected centuries of royal tradition, yet behind the celebration, personal challenges would emerge. Life inside the monarchy brought immense pressure. Every appearance was examined, every photograph interpreted, every silence became a headline. Over time, the marriage faced increasing difficulties. Public attention intensified as private struggles became widely reported. In 1992, the couple announced their separation. 4 years later, the marriage officially ended. The story had become far larger than two individuals. It reshaped conversations about the monarchy itself. Then came the events of 1997. The death of Diana shocked Britain and much of the world. An extraordinary wave of public grief followed. The royal family faced one of its greatest modern challenges. Questions were asked, emotions ran high. The institution gradually adapted to changing public expectations. For Charles, the years that followed were marked by continued public service. He focused on charitable work, environmental issues, and constitutional duties. Public perceptions slowly evolved. Time once again became an important part of the story. History would continue to reassess one of the most scrutinized lives in modern Britain. The prince who had once stood at the center of intense public debate continued preparing for a role he had waited decades to inherit. For 70 years, Britain knew only one monarch. Queen Elizabeth II had become a symbol of continuity across generations. Her reign witnessed extraordinary global change, from the age of radio to the age of artificial intelligence. For Charles, she was not only the queen, she was also his mother. On September 8th, 2022, the world received news that would define a generation. Queen Elizabeth II had died at Balmoral Castle. Across Britain, church bells rang, flags were lowered. Millions paused to reflect on an extraordinary reign. At that very moment, history moved with remarkable speed. The waiting was over. By constitutional tradition, Charles immediately became king. Not after a ceremony, not after a coronation. The crown passed the instant the previous reign ended. Preparation became responsibility. The heir had become the sovereign. Soon afterward came the Accession Council. Historic words echoed through St. James's Palace. For the first time, Charles spoke to the nation as king. His address acknowledged both personal loss and public duty. It marked the beginning of a new reign. Months later, preparations began for a coronation unlike any seen in generations. Westminster Abbey prepared once again for history. On May 6, 2023, Charles III was crowned. Ancient traditions met the modern world. The ceremony reflected nearly 1,000 years of constitutional history. The boy born into destiny had finally reached the moment history had promised. After decades of waiting, preparation became reality. The crown no longer represented a future responsibility. It had become his present duty. Britain entered a new Carolean era. One chapter of history had ended, another had quietly begun. The longest wait in modern royal history was finally complete. Every monarch eventually faces the same question. How will history remember them? For King Charles III, that answer is still being written. Unlike many kings before him, he entered the throne after a lifetime of preparation. Few sovereigns have spent so many decades studying the responsibilities of the crown before wearing it. His reign began in an era very different from the one his mother inherited. Britain had changed. The Commonwealth had changed. The world itself had changed. Modern monarchs are expected to preserve tradition while adapting to the present. It is one of the most delicate constitutional balances in public life. Long before becoming king, Charles championed environmental conservation. He also supported architecture, heritage preservation, and charitable initiatives through organizations such as the Prince's Trust. Supporters view these interests as evidence of decades of public service. Critics have sometimes questioned how openly a future monarch should express personal views. Such debates reflect the evolving role of constitutional monarchy in modern democracy. Only time will determine how history judges this reign. Every decision now belongs not to the Prince of Wales, but to the king. The crown he waited decades to wear now carries the weight of every new day. His story reminds us that leadership often demands patience before power. That preparation can last a lifetime, and that history rarely moves as quickly as we expect. For 73 years, Charles prepared for a single moment. Now every day contributes to the legacy he will ultimately leave behind. Whether admired or criticized, his reign will become another chapter in Britain's long constitutional story. Future generations will study these years, just as historians study those who came before. The crown endures because each generation adds its own chapter. Kings come and go, history continues, and somewhere inside Westminster Abbey, the coronation cheer waits patiently for another century to unfold. Long after today's headlines have faded, the story of service, duty, and continuity will remain, because crowns are inherited, but legacies are earned. The boy born into destiny became the man who waited, and finally the king who stepped into history.